Lars Callieou, welcome. Thank you for coming on the show.
Well, thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Now, to give you a bit of an intro, you're a comedian from Canada who travels around the world, does comedy. You've done comedy in UK, United States. In fact, how many countries?
Around 25 countries now. Yeah.
And tell us how you got started in comedy, because that's kind of what we're interested in. Is like, how did you come to your first ever gig?
My parents were professional musicians, and I thought I was going to play music, and I was terrible. I couldn't carry a tune in a bucket. So I gave up on my music dream when I was 21, but I had thought about doing comedy from the time I was about 6 years old, and started doing comedy in 2003. And won a contest in 2004 and have been working the road almost every weekend since 2004.
But you were saying that you used to listen to comedy records, is that right? You used to listen to routines and comedy records, and you had an ability to kind of memorize, didn't you? Is that
right? I studied jokes. Now, by that I mean my parents would buy me joke books when I was like 6, 7, 8 years old, and I would memorize all the jokes. I would hear street jokes, and I would memorize the street jokes. And just loved making people laugh. From the time I was 6 years old, I absolutely loved it. And started watching A&E's Evening at the Improv when I was probably 13, 14, somewhere in there. And I could memorize a stand-up comedian set watching it one time. So 5, 7 minutes, however long they did on there. I could memorize it like that, and then I would go to school and recite all the jokes and pass them off as my own, or just do the routines. And I
have to ask Lars if you have that same memory for phone numbers, number plates. I mean, is that just a comedy? Is that really just centric to joke telling? Is it?
That's a good question. I've certainly with geography and history, I know dates pretty well, and I can probably put most countries in the world on a map. I had somebody once say to me, I was flying, and somebody said, "How many states do you think you could name in the U.S.?" And I said, 50? And they were like, "You think you could name all 50 states?" I'm like, "I could name them all and put them all on a map." It's not that impressive, I don't think. But I could do most of the countries in Europe, most of the countries in Asia. I think there's a couple that trip me up, like kind of Eastern Bloc countries in Europe sometimes trip me up. But other than that, when it came to dates and times and country names, it was always easy.
So Lars, tell us about this, okay? So you're at a comedy venue, right? And you're about to do your very first gig. So you've come up with, 5 minutes of routine?
Yeah.
5 minutes?
Yeah.
And have you run it by any friends or anything? Have you told anyone? Did your parents know you're doing it? I mean, tell us the first gig. Tell us what happened.
So I had been working cruise ships as a casino dealer. So I was a casino dealer from...
Is that blackjack?
All games. Craps, roulette, pie-gout, tiles, baccarat, everything but poker. Poker, too many people complaining, so I never dealt poker, but... was a casino dealer working on cruise ships, 2001, 2002. Came home and then had a little bit of money in my pocket and decided I was going to try an open mic. So I went down and signed up. They gave me my first ever spot in a club, May 20th, 2003. And I rehearsed my set, I want to guess, about 1,000 times. And my friend Derek, who I was living with at the time, watched me rehearse my set probably 500 of those times, and he would tweak it and critique it. He's very funny. He's got a good sense for comedy. I was holding a broom handle, I think it might have been a mop, and I had a remote control that I was using as a microphone, and I rehearsed in front of a full-length mirror, but also Derek could be sitting in a chair, and I would rehearse. So when I watched my first set, because it didn't have a bass, I couldn't let go of the mop because the mop would fall over. So when I did my first set, when I watched the video of it, I'm holding the mic stand and I never take my hand off the top of the mic stand, because if it was the mop, it would have fallen over. So I could have done it with that, but I watch it and I'm like, oh. It was well received. I had probably somewhere between 50 and 60 friends in the crowd that first time.
So you really, you decked it out with...
Yeah.
See, there are some people, Lars, who think... some people who don't have 60 friends, let's put it that way, and some people who think, well, I don't want anyone kind of know, I want to do it kind of, secretly, and because that's the life of a comic anyway, really. You're mostly doing it in front of people you don't know.
Yeah.
And so you had a lot of friends there, they loved it, they supported it.
Yeah. And then probably the reason, I was funny, but probably the reason I won the competition I did was because I had somewhere between 80 and 100 friends in the crowd for the final round of that competition, and I won, and then I was the funniest new comedian in Alberta, the province of Alberta in Canada. And then I was really lucky in that the prize was first class on a train from Edmonton, where I lived, to Toronto, where I would compete against the other winner. And on that train, I was with an agent from a bunch of comedy clubs, and we became friends, and she booked me on the road like every single weekend for the next few years. And then I started working in a comedy club that had just opened. So there's a comedy club in Edmonton called the Comic Strip. Rick Bronson's the Comic Strip. One of the A comedy clubs in all of North America. It's a premier comedy club. And because I had just won this competition, I became the house MC in, I think it would have been November of 2004. And I hosted that club every other weekend for the next 4.5 years. And it is so home to me. It is home field advantage. And I mean, the Comic Strip is one of my favorite places to be on the planet.
Yeah, man, like your own living room.
It really feels that way.
You know every brick.
Every single one of them, and the staff are very lovely, and so they're family, and have been. The club celebrated 20 years in 2004, and I messaged like the owners and the managers and said, "Man, 20 years that's a heck of a run for anything, any business, but." Comedy club, certainly.
I've got to tell you a story, Lars. I was in Adelaide's Make Me Laugh competition in the final, and they took people from all around Australia. So there were 2 from Melbourne, 2 from Sydney, 2 from whatever. Anyway, the first prize was a trip to Edinburgh.
Cool.
For the Edinburgh Fest. I came second.
Oh.
Second prize was a bottle of champagne. so first prize, you go to Edinburgh to a festival show. Second prize, bottle of champagne. And I, at the time, I really didn't drink. So I thought that was a little bit that was a bit of a step down. Yeah. I mean, I was happy with second, but still, it was a bit of a bummer.
Yeah, and you remember those forever. You're like, oh, I was so close, but. In competitions, usually you make a lot of great connections, and those people for the the rest of your career, it feels like you went to summer camp with them.
Now, Lars, I was going to say, I saw you perform the other night at the Knock Knock School, and there was something about you that stood out from the amateur pack of comics, or the semi-professionals, and that is your ability to talk about something for like 7 minutes. That's just one topic.
Sure.
And I'm referring to, you sat next to a woman on a plane who was knitting, I hope I can say that.
Yeah, absolutely.
But the fact that you got 6 or 7 minutes material out of that one thing, I mean, that sets you apart as a pro. Yeah. Tell us about that. I mean, because you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, absolutely, sure.
The amateurs can talk 30 seconds about that.
Yeah.
But to get 7, is that kind of built up over years or?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, and I think this is global. I think it's safe to say that whether you're in England, America, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, so you will come up with a joke. So you write a joke, and then once you take a joke, and it happens to go with another one, so whether you're on a plane, so a joke with another joke, and then another becomes a bit. So now it's no longer just a single joke, now it's a bit. Now you've got a bit, and then a bunch of bits together is a chunk. So that's a chunk about, being on an airplane talking to a lady about knitting. So it gets kind of Legoed, you had the initial one, and then the next one kind of fits in, and the next one kind of fits in. And the segues that connect all of that to make it a chunk are built up over time. And the transition being really smooth, the segue, I think it might have been Stephen. No, it wasn't Stephen Wrights. I can probably, Dimitri Martin. Anyway, whoever the comedian was, I know who it was. Very funny Canadian comedian who moved to the UK. It'll come to me. Stuart Francis. So Stuart Francis, who's a fantastic, incredible joke writer, his opening joke, he would come out and get to the microphone and say, "Did I already tell my deja vu joke?"
That's
weird. Stuart Francis. So Stuart Francis' joke, he goes, "I have a dog named Segway." And he goes, "Speaking of segways," and then he goes into a joke about the ridey thing, like a segue.
Okay. Right.
So a segue is something that leads you into the next one.
Yeah. Okay.
And when that takes place, where the transition is incredibly natural, so it almost looks like you're still talking about the same thing. Really, you've just found a bunch of jokes that work together. Like I talk about, because I talk about being in the 80s and the 80s toys. So I can do probably 20 minutes, maybe more, on, I would talk about pickup sticks and the game Operation. And I had a joke about Operation that I did on a comedy special where my brother and I would would up the stakes in operation, we would play it in the bathtub. So, you're sitting there like, man.
Making the director laugh.
Yeah. Do you smell Pop-Tarts? Which is, so all of those 80s toys jokes were written independently, but it just so happens that when you're talking about pickup sticks, when you're talking about all these different toys, they just are all funny things to me. Which, this is a true story. I stopped doing the joke because it never really worked, but so I have an older sister, and we would play the game I Spy, but she would change the thing. So my whole childhood, I never guessed I Spy with my little eyes, something that's blue. Well, I never guessed the thing because she would always just change the thing. So when somebody explained to me, like, no, eventually you guess the thing, I was like, what? You can guess the thing? I never once guessed the thing in my whole life because my sister would change it. So the joke never got a big laugh, but the I Spy stuff would connect with this, would connect with that, and all of those things then become the chunk that makes it look like.
But how long does it take you to build, so let's say I hop on a bus, and next to me on the bus is someone who's breastfeeding a baby.
Sure.
How does that then become a 5-minute route? How many years does it take to build that up to a 5-minute, where you're talking about, because you mentioned at one point, I don't want to give the gag away, but you mentioned at one point.
Well, you can always just do the gag, sure.
No, I can't do it, but I remember at one point you made a reference to Melbourne audiences.
Yeah.
With the knitting stuff, and I kind of thought, well, gee, that's so incredible. That's a really smart. Like you've obviously got every angle cut. How many years does it take to build up that? You're sitting next to someone on a train, or something happens to you at work, or you're going to buy pizza and something happens, and then it's all of a sudden it's a 5-minute routine. How long does that take?
It varies. I wish.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely, sure. I don't know how long it would take a particular, let's say somebody was a professional musician, how long it would take them to put together an album. So sometimes the songs are fully formed, almost. One out of every 1,000. You just sit down, you write the lyrics, you've got the music, and it just happens. Yeah. And there's a few jokes where the joke just happened. So I have a joke about, shark attacks. And when that joke was written, it was written in 2.5 seconds. And then that joke is fully formed, and you can play with it. You can change the words, you can change the numbers, you can change the timing of the joke, but the joke was just done. Yeah. And then that fits with a bunch of other Australian stuff, so that chunk talking about Australia is probably, again, 15 or 20 minutes. So that was the whole thing, and talking about Australia was probably developed over 3 years, coming to Australia for 3 months a year for 3 years. So it just kind of formed into something that felt a little more complete. Yeah. But it varies from, sometimes there's a story. So I had completely forgotten about a story. And when I remembered the story, I told it on stage, and I'll just tell the story. So there was a couple who asked me if I would do wedding comedy. Would you do comedy at our wedding? And I don't think comedy should be at a wedding. I don't think it fits. Hey, cake cutting, first dance, here's a clown. I just don't think it fits. But they said, we've seen your show, we love it. It's both of our second marriages. We would love it if you would do comedy at it. And I said, okay, let's do it. So I went to do it. I arrived, bride and groom greet me, and they're like, nobody knows you're here. It's going to be a surprise. And when this came to me to talk about this, I'm like, oh, I'd completely forgotten about that. And that night I told the story, basically they invited me to do comedy, and it's our second wedding, and they did dinner, then speeches, and it was supposed to be dinner, speeches, comedy, but they went dinner, speeches, slideshow. Cute slideshow, very well done, good music, her is a little girl, him is a little boy, and then them growing up, and then no pictures from either of their first marriages. Feels like an omission. And
it's a bit strange, isn't it?
Yeah, it seems like a bit of a gap. So anyway, then I say to the audiences, and it's true, everybody's okay in the end, so just so everybody's fine. But the bride then takes the microphone and says to her friends and family in attendance at her wedding, we want everybody to know that my cancer has returned.
Oh, no way.
Not a dry eye in the place. Husband comes on stage, hugging, crying, mascara pouring down faces.
Oh, no.
And
Poor thing.
Bride hands me the microphone.
Oh, no way.
So now I'm doing 45 minutes of comedy with no intro. So everybody thinks I'm just seen an opening and thought, hey, I'll launch my comedy career. Like, nobody had any idea why I was there. Like, a couple people were like, read the room. What's wrong with this guy? Like, why are you telling us 100% true? Every word of it is true.
It sounds like a Seinfeld episode. It sounds like...
Yeah, and I heard somebody in the back go, is that Glenda's kid? So I bombed so bad. And again, everybody's okay, so thank goodness everybody's okay now. But when that came to me and I was telling the story, and I've probably told the story on stage maybe a dozen times since, I had completely forgotten about this moment. But I didn't have to change a word of that story other than the name Glenda. It's actually one of my like really good friends. That's his mom's name, so it's kind of like a hat tip to her, like, hey, here's Glenda. And I like the name because it fits. They could be of any kind of age. You're like, is that Glenda's kid? So I like that part of it. But other than that, I didn't have to change a word of it, and that just came out as like a 3, 4, 5 minute story. And
that works on, and you tell it on stage, and people go, and they're happy to go with it. They're happy to ride the story here.
Yeah, especially if you got to really preface it by saying like, "Hey, everybody's okay. Like this has a happy ending," and then that just is formed. You got 3, 4 minutes of material that just this thing happened to you, and obviously the saying in comedy. Comedy is tragedy plus time. Like tragedy plus time equals comedy.
100%.
So. With that tragedy, and especially if it's something terrible that happened to you, the audiences will eat it up because you are the buffoon, you are the butt of the joke, you are
you are the guy wanting to win who has no chance of winning. Yeah. Lars, what advice would you give? Because this, when I describe this show, I say to people, look, this is a show about comedy. It's not a comedy show. It's not necessarily a funny show. It's more about we talk about the nuts and bolts of comedy.
Sure.
What advice would you give to newbies, people starting out, people who are interested in comedy, or people who have done maybe 40 gigs or 20 gigs, and they're kind of, because, Rick Rubin, great, music producer, is doing a documentary about comedians, and he says that the default is like there's this 10 years of bombing on stage or 10 years of struggling before it kind of clicks around the 10-year mark. I mean, that's been his experience from doing these interviews. What advice have you got? I mean, what would you say to people,
Well, I encourage everybody to try it. If you're thinking about trying stand-up comedy, I encourage people to try it. I want them to try it for 2 reasons. First, because if it's your passion, if it's your calling, if it is your destiny to be a comedian, try it. It's the coolest job in the world. It's taken me to so many different places. I've been to the North Pole. I've done shows on a Canadian naval frigate. I've done, there's not too many places I haven't done shows. And so I feel incredibly lucky, and I want everybody else to experience, like, living your passion, doing what you love. The other reason I want them to try stand-up comedy is because people will never know what it's like until they try it. You can listen to 1,000 podcasts. You could listen to, you read a million books about doing stand-up comedy. Until you've stood behind a microphone with a bunch of strangers in the audience, you wouldn't have any idea what it's like. There's just no way to describe it to somebody. So that's the main reason I would want people to try it. As far as advice, there's a lot of great stuff. So first, I read this, I wish I could attribute it to an author, but I read this piece of advice many years ago, and that is, say what you think is funny, keep what the audience finds funny. You'll be true to yourself comedians should never call themselves artists. That's not a thing that really happens in comedy. But if you say what you think is funny, whatever tickles your funny bone, talking about knitting makes me laugh, talking about this wedding makes me laugh, it makes me laugh. And if I say what I think is funny, and I keep what the audience finds funny, then what you will have is kind of a genuineness, an authenticity to talking about the things that made you laugh, and it's easy to sell it. Like, I had a joke, I only told it a few times, and it wasn't true. It wasn't true to me, and it wasn't that funny. If there's any comedians out there, if you want this joke, I don't tell it anymore. I told it like 3 times. I couldn't tell it. It's yours. Have it. Like, write your own stuff, but you can have this one. So the idea was that, I became single, so I wanted to download a dating app because I've never been on one, and I meant to download Tinder, but I downloaded Uber. And when the person showed up, it was a guy, and I was like, how do you change it to girls? I don't know how to change it to girls. And I got in, and the guy said, where do you want to go? And I was like, where do you want to go? You know? He's like, do you want to go home? And I'm like, well, it's a bit soon for a first date. But it was a made-up story. It was fictional.
Construction.
It was totally, I thought it was silly, like Tinder Uber. The words were funny, and the idea of, messing that up. But there was no truth to it. And it would get laughs, but I couldn't sell it because I didn't believe it, and it didn't happen. So
that's we've been talking about this recently on the show. This whole idea of writing, the Woody Allen gags of, that very cleverly constructed. That Woody Allen tells a gag about. I got an offer to do an advertisement to some tobacco and grog, and I went and asked my rabbi, and he said, "Don't do it." Then I looked at the ad; he was on it, and so there's this kind of like completely untrue,
right.
but the gag writing that he has, this is back in the day. And I said that this was the problem with my routine, is that I've kind of written these gags, none of which are true, none of which are all, they're kind of, they're not really authentic. Who hasn't had a fight with their landlord, right?
Right.
But telling your landlord you come crash on the couch, it's just, it's not, you know what I mean?
I disagree.
Okay, go on.
So.
No, but go on, say.
So. I listened to Todd Glass, a very funny comedian from the U.S., and Todd Glass said, he goes, when I watch a comedian, he goes, I don't think they suck because they're doing jokey jokes, because they're doing gags like a Mitch Hedberg, Stephen Wright, Dimitri Martin, like these one-liner, Wendy Liebman, all these great one-liner comedians. He goes, I don't dislike a comedian because they're doing jokey jokes. I dislike a comedian who doesn't tell it from the gut. And when I heard him say that, I found it incredibly impactful. So your joke is a well-written joke. When you wrote it, it made you laugh. Right. So when you're telling that story, it's from the gut. It's from your heart. You're taking that and you're giving it to the crowd. So don't ever apologize for writing a jokey joke. I used to apologize for writing a jokey joke, and a very funny comedian, she came up to me after we used to write a wonderful comedy blog called Shecky Magazine. They've been writing books since, so they haven't continued the blog, but it's got lots of useful information. So sheckymagazine.com. So Tracy, who's been in comedy for probably 35 years, 30 years, she came up and she said, stop apologizing for that joke. She's like, it's a funny joke. It's a well-written joke. Yeah. But it was a jokey joke. So I love Stephen Wright. If people don't know Stephen Wright, go watch some of his stuff. It is, he goes, I named my dog Stay. I was like, hey, Stay, come here, Stay. So Stephen Wright, his jokes are great. I remember laughing so hard at one of his jokes where he goes, I got arrested the other day for scalping low numbers in the deli. He goes, I got $20 for a 3. None of those are true, but it's from the gut. He's saying stuff that he thinks is funny. So to say what you think is funny and keep what the audience finds funny,
that's still being authentic, you reckon? If you
absolutely
do jokey jokes,
because you're being true to yourself. Another great one regarded as one of the greatest writers of all time is Rodney Dangerfield. And Rodney Dangerfield, none of his stuff is true, but we're talking about a guy who really was not only true to himself, but you can't ever, his material is brilliant, it was one of my favorites of Rodney Dangerfield. He goes, my parents got me some bath toys for Christmas. They got me a radio and a toaster. Because it would shock you to death as you
So I want to kind of unpack this a little bit. I was thinking that, because I've been on this quest of not being able to sell my gags. That I've been telling them for too long, and some of them go back to the 1990s, and I'm kind of like, not believing in them anymore, and even wondering what was funny about this in the first place. And I was thinking, how can I talk about me, my life, my scars, my situation, reveal my soul in a way? Have you got any? What would you say to someone like me who goes, well, because for those watching the show, I did comedy in the 1990s and took a break for 20 years.
Yeah,
had 20 years off, and I've been trying to wind the lawnmower back up.
Sure.
It's like the lawnmower's been in the backyard rusted for 20 years. I'm trying to get started. It's very hard for me to get started,
Sure.
What advice, how do I tap into like a new, I can't do a 1990s. Do you have gags that you told 20 years ago that they're still staple?
No, and it's funny because when I was working cruise ships as a comedian, and I had to dig because, you do a lot of different material you're doing, depending on the cruise line. Some of them you're doing 5 different half-hour shows, so you had to get to 2.5 hours of material. So I was doing some old stuff that a couple of times I'm like, I don't even remember how this joke goes. And I saw a joke from my comedy special, it's a little bit of TV in Canada, and I saw one joke and I'm like, wow, I had completely forgotten that I ever told that joke. I was like, wow, I forgot all about that one. So I think if you're working as a professional comedian, it's been my job now for 15 years, I think that the material will turn over almost naturally. It's a generic, when I start talking, it's like I got engaged on December 21st, and talking about that engagement is genuine and sincere. It's really happened. So that will end up being, who knows, 5 to 7 to 10 minutes, depending.
But do you put a twist on it? I mean, do you put a twist on it, so you kind of take it to some unreal kind of elements to get the gags, because at the end of the day, you're a comic, right? I mean, so is it exaggerated truth? Is that what you...
Well, remember that there's no right way or wrong way. I mean, look at Richard Pryor. Richard Pryor, really kind of the godfather and founder of modern stand-up, like being vulnerable, talking about real things that happened. Mm-hmm. His stuff wasn't really fabricated. He was talking about heavy moments in his life and saying it in a funny way. So I never want to influence a comedian's writing or material because it's very personal. What I might do if I were trying to make stuff that's going on in my life funny now is I would rent a weird space, like a laundromat. I would ask a laundromat owner, can I do a show in your laundromat? Because it's not going to cost anything to rent it. And then what I would do was tell my friends, I'm going to do an hour of unfunny material. I'm going to do an hour that's not going to work. But if you guys want to come along and see the process, then come along. So if you imagine you going into that laundromat and just taking everyday stuff that's happened to you over the past 5 years and go up and talk about it, the visual for me has always been you're going down to the river and you take your little gold pan and then you just pan for gold. And in those stories, let's say you did 45 minutes of just talking and you let people know ahead of time, I'm just going to be talking. You'll find little nuggets that'll naturally shake out. You're a naturally funny person. The reason that you do comedy is because you kind of think in jokes and comedy. Mm-hmm. So when you do that, you will find little punchlines that will come out generically in the conversation where you'll find that little nugget and you go, man, I never even thought about that. Mm-hmm. No, I never even thought about that. So that will come out over time, and you only need 10 people, 15 people, and it would be nice to have 20 or 25, but letting people know I am going to try and get 10 minutes out of this, and I'm going to talk for 45 to 60 minutes. Mm-hmm. Maybe book somebody to open for you, get a comic you're fond of to do 5 or 10 minutes off the top, and then give them a 60-minute show, and you can make it free, or you can make it by donation, or you can, you're obviously wealthy, so you don't necessarily need the money, but I don't know if you ever heard that.
That's another routine. We talk about that.
Well, we talk about, was it Sugar Ray Robinson who said, it's like, how come as a boxer, you're not doing as well as you used to? And he goes, it's pretty hard to get up at 5 a.m. when you're sleeping in silk pajamas. So, yeah, that's probably why you haven't worked on this new stuff, is your mansion. Like, I got here, my dressing room has its own hot tub. Like, I have a spa in my dressing room here. So, this is cashed up.
Well, I tell you, you're very gracious, very generous, Lars. But to be honest, I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the stuff you're doing while you're here in Melbourne.
Sure.
Talk about what you're doing, where people can come and see you, and then I kind of really want to talk about. Or ask you questions about, okay, what is the projection? What is the dream, or is the dream happening? The John Lennon, I think, said that life happens when you're making plans for other things. Whatever that saying is. Well, maybe we'll go there first. Is there? Would you like to do a Lars TV show, or a Tonight Show, or would you like to do Lars travels to Europe and have a camera crew follow you around? What's the dream, or is the dream happening?
Well, yeah, I think that, this being my job for 15 years, I feel like we're in the middle of a dream, truly. I think everybody, when they start out, you want to get a Tonight Show, a Letterman, you wanted to do I'll talk about this really quickly. So before, like when the Tonight Show was run by Johnny Carson, it was the most prestigious thing in the world. Like when Johnny Carson hosted, and there were 3 levels of Johnny Carson's acceptance of you as a comedian. So what was it? So if he clapped after your set, it means you weren't getting invited back. If he gave you the thumbs up or the okay, it means you're getting invited back, but you're not getting invited over to do panel. And then if Johnny Carson waved you over, you were then validated. You were then made as a comedian. So being waved over to the couch with Johnny Carson was every comedian's dream. And if there is a heaven, I would want it to be getting waved over to the couch with Johnny Carson. That would be the greatest moment. And I know a couple of people that were, so it's, man, I talk to them about it every single time where I'm like, wow, that must have been so awesome getting waved over by Johnny Carson. So that was the dream. But each September and October, I bring over a couple of international comedians to Canada. I take them on tour for, depending, anywhere from, some comedians come over in 2-week chunks, but some of the comedians are there for 5 or 6 weeks. And I love to show them my country and book fun shows for them. So I would like to grow that, because it's really fun having international acts in Canada and showing them bears and that. So I'd love to grow that so that it's something where I'm, able to really stretch that out. So we have, a lot of the venues are coming back on now, so I'm really proud of that. And then I think one of my biggest dreams right now is to do comedy in Antarctica. So if anybody is watching this who works in Antarctica or regularly flies or boats down there, I will do comedy on your boat or plane, and then do comedy for people in Antarctica. Because then that would be, I still have to do Africa. I was scheduled to do Egypt, but once I've done Africa, then I'll perform on all the continents, which is a goal of mine. But then as far as like a TV show, not really. I mean, getting a couple of comedy specials, having a Netflix special is obviously a goal for most comedians, but with YouTube really blowing people up, you can put out a comedy special on YouTube and that can make you bigger than Netflix does. Netflix certainly helps, but you get an Amazon Prime, you do something on HBO. Those are all really big deals and still goals of mine. And that's something that, I believe that we have the skill and comedy chops to get. I feel like
so what you're saying in a sense is that you really no longer need permission or gatekeepers in a way. You just hire some camera gear and get some buddies along, get an editor, and it's all become accessible, hasn't it? Really.
Yeah, truly. And I feel like I've been so lucky. I never take it for granted. Wake up every day, and we're in Australia, and when I wake up in Australia, I don't wake up and go, well, another day being a comedian. I wake up every day and go, I'm a stand-up comedian. This is the craziest thing ever. Like, I can't even imagine. Like, it's bonkers.
Let me ask you a question, Lars, because I think this is an important question for people out there, and even someone like myself. But you remember the TV show MASH?
Yeah, you bet.
Alan Alda, I think, was getting paid $100,000 an episode. This is back in the early 80s.
Oh, huge,
yeah.
Number one show.
It was huge money. You know what I mean? I mean, don't you think that getting like a, I don't know what a contract is for a top rating show, but like a Friends or, whatever, but maybe getting up, 80 million a year to do some top rating show. I mean, isn't there an appeal about that? Setting yourself up financially or...
Not even a little.
No, really. So the money, it's more lifestyle of going from...
It's not even that. I have so much respect for people who worked hard at their craft. So
that's a great answer, by the way.
Yeah. So when I watch a carpenter work, a good carpenter, you just see him measure twice, cut once, get the job done. I have so much respect for that. When I watch people do insulation, and they're good insulators. So you guys probably don't need insulation in Australia. So in Canada, it's cold all the time. So our houses need insulation. But when you watch a good insulator work, they're quick and they're skillful. When I watch an actor work, and I've acted in probably, I want to say 8 or 9 movies. And when I watch an actor work, I am in awe, because that muscle takes the same amount of work, like you said, 10 years. 10 years of deliberate practice to become a master at something. And I have no acting training. You know, I've never taken an acting class. And my first ever day on set, I didn't know what a call sheet was. So the call sheet tells you which scene you're doing and then the lines you're doing in that scene. Well, I knew we didn't shoot the movie chronologically. Like, I knew it wasn't shot start to finish, but I worked really hard to memorize the first 25 pages of the script because I was like, I don't know how far we're going to shoot that day.
You got to know the whole thing.
You got to know the whole thing.
Yeah.
And I showed up and they were like, okay, we're doing scene 31, you know, whatever. And then I went, oh man, I didn't read that far. And I went, I don't know these lines. And I looked like I wasn't prepared, but I busted my butt to be prepared. Yeah. I didn't know how to read a call sheet.
Yeah, right.
And I remember I worked with this really great actor, an actual actor. So I was a reporter, and the editor of the newspaper I worked for was a real actor. And he came in and he nailed his lines. Nailed it. I mean, I believed his character. It was, the emotion was genuine. It was, and I literally, after he finished delivering his lines, I just pointed, I go, did you guys, that was so good. Like, did you guys see that? So I would love to write for television. I would definitely write for television. I think that's something that would speak to me. But as far as
But you don't think
acting,
about the financial, the carrot, you know,
not
set
even a
yourself
little.
up, or, you know.
Nope, not even the least bit interested.
You know, it's funny, there's a guy, clinical psychologist, who talks about that, you know, people, when they really make a lot of money and they really do well financially, a whole bunch of problems follow after that anyway. You know,
Sure.
if you know what I mean. I mean, we had another comic on the show, Cameron Murator, talk about trying to find that middle ground of avoiding the extremes. You know, like not living out of a bin, but not living in Beverly Hills either. You know, that whole middle ground where you know. And it sounds like you're in a similar space. Tell us about what's happening in Melbourne quickly, the Comedy Festival, what you're doing here, your show, where we can see it.
Lots of shows bouncing around. So comedy pub crawls, if you guys haven't done a comedy crawl, they're great. You see 5 different comedians and you go to 4 different pubs. The show that I recommend, and I'm not on this one, but I recommend this show. So if you're watching this, go see the Comedy Ashes. The Comedy Ashes, for my money, is one of the best shows in the entire comedy festival. The reason is you have 4 comedians who are British or English and 4 comedians who are Australian, and they go up and it's scored and they compete against each other. And those comedians are not fooling around. They go up there and they swing for the fences. Wow. It is a fantastic show where they don't have time and they're representing their country. So it is the Comedy Ashes, highly recommend. Comedy pub crawls.
And now, can I ask you a question? The Australians on the Comedy Ashes, are they pro?
Oh yeah, both of them. So there's captains for each team.
Yeah.
So Dan Willis, and we in Canada we don't use the term palm, but Dan Willis is a palm. He captains England. And then McNevin, who's Australian, he captains. So they pick their teams.
Oh, okay. Wow.
So they will invite people to represent their countries. And then if you haven't seen it, go watch the Comedy Ashes. The Comics Lounge has been really good to me. So the Comics Lounge in North Melbourne, but it's in the CBD, basically just outside the CBD. They've been really good to me, so I'm usually there. I just finished the week there. They're awesome. That comedy club is one of the best in the world. So, and then the Elephant and Wheelbarrow has an around the world show. Terry North, who I've taken to Canada, they run that. So if you're going to the around the world show, you'll see 5 different comedians from around the world, and I recommend that one. But man, with 600 shows at the Melbourne Comedy Festival, go out. You can pick somebody at random. I believe Marcus Ryan is doing one show here. And Marcus Ryan, just look up Marcus Ryan. I believe his Instagram is It's Marcus Ryan, like ITS, It's Marcus Ryan, or Hey, It's Marcus Ryan. Anyway, look up Marcus Ryan. He is a good friend and somebody whose show I watch every year. He's a brilliant storyteller. He's one of the best storytellers I've seen, so.
Well, Lars, thank you for coming on the show. Now, I believe you've got a gig tonight at 9.
Yeah.
Safe travels, break a leg, rah-rah-rah. Lars, it's been a pleasure to have you.
Thanks for having me.
And next time you come back, hopefully we're still doing the show. We'd love to have you come back, give us an update.
Yeah, I'm going to need a guide to get me out of this mansion. If you guys are on Instagram, I follow everybody back. So I tell people, if you're on Instagram, mine's extra, like the word extra, like EXTRA, and then Lars, which is for real my name. So if you go to Extra Lars, if you follow me,
And Lars is Lars.
Lars, yeah.
Extra Lars.
Yeah.
Instagram, yeah.
Yeah. So Extra Lars, I tell people if you follow me, I'll follow you back, and then you can unfollow me, and you will gain a follower. So like 1,200 people have done that. It's fine. It's whatever.
All right, we'll see you. Go on there, Richie.
Do you want to give a plug for your tour, South Australia, WA?
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely. And it's so we're going to be each year we've done a part of Australia. Chris Franklin, the guy, singer, writer of the song "Bloke." So Chris, the Bloke Franklin, and I do a tour. And this year we're working from Melbourne to Adelaide and then Adelaide to Darwin. If anybody watching this knows any country pubs or any spaces or spots for comedy, we do people's backyards as well. You know, you probably need 25 people if there's that. But if you live anywhere between Melbourne and Adelaide and Darwin, send us a message and we can do a show. We have a few dates that are available, so I'm pretty excited about that. I've been to Darwin before, but I've never been to a lot of the stuff up the guts, and we get to go to Uluru, which I've wanted to do since I was about 7 years old.
Yeah, interestingly enough, I've never been to Uluru. Shame on me, and I'm an Aussie. We'll see you next time on the Arwin Kraze Show. Good night, everybody.